Okay, good evening, everybody. I think we'll get started. I know that some of you are logging in as we get going here, so we appreciate you being with us this evening. My name is Mara Palmer. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Academics and Support here in the Salem School District, and I'm joined by a fine panel of folks who will introduce themselves as we go. We hope that you've had an opportunity to view the movie Angst that was presented to you either yesterday or Monday. That was sponsored by our district mental health team. And we're happy to be here this evening in this town hall forum to talk about anxiety and anxiety as it relates to COVID-19. And I'm happy to have a panel of folks from the Center for Life Management, which is our local mental health agency. And they're the experts on this topic, and they'll talk through this with us all. So with me from the school district this evening is Nicole Burke. She is the Director of Counseling at Salem High School.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
And I will pass off to Sandy Norton from CLM, and she will introduce her team, and we'll get started. And we will have some time for question and answer at the end. Unfortunately, our chat feature is not working, but if you have a question, I'm going to suggest that you email Nicole Burke. So her name is there in her square. If you just put a dot between Nicole and Burke, so it would be nicole.burke@sau57.org. The same email address that we all have with her name at the front. She will pass along the questions to our team. So we'll remind everybody of that as we go. All right, so would you like to take it from here, Sandy?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. My name is Sandy Norton. I am the Clinical Director at Center for Life Management. Tonight, I am here with Ashley O'Donnell. Ashley is a clinical supervisor overseeing several of our clinicians. She works with children and is located out of our Salem office most days. And also, here with us tonight is Lucy Cluley and Rachel Pockerney. They are both interning with us at Center for Life Management and will be presenting doing the anxiety presentation this evening. I'll let you ladies get started.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. So hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us tonight for this anxiety and COVID-19 presentation. My name is Rachel Pocorti, and I'm completing my clinical mental health counseling internship with Center for Life Management from Southern New Hampshire University, and this is my partner.
Hi, my name is Lucy Cluley, and I am finishing up my MSW at Simmons University in April.
Lucy and I have been in the children's department at Center for Life Management working with children experiencing serious emotional difficulties such as depression, ADHD, autism, disruptive behaviors, substance use disorders, and trauma. In the last couple of months, we have seen a huge increase in the amount of people coming through CLM's doors. And we know that emotional health impacts each area of a child's life, including family, school, and social relationships, which is why we felt it was so important to create this presentation for you all. During tonight's presentation, Lucy and I will be discussing what anxiety is, how anxiety works, ways to recognize anxiety, reversing the anxiety cycle, rating anxiety, coping strategies to decrease anxiety, and specifically how anxiety can feel during COVID-19, as well as a couple treatment options. Lucy and I are extremely excited to bring you this information, and we'll have time at the end, as mentioned, for questions and comments. So let's jump right in. We all know that the world is posing a lot of challenges, and one way to combat some of these challenges is to understand them. Anxiety in children during the time of COVID-19 is increasing. Public health actions such as social distancing can make people feel isolated and lonely and increase stress and anxiety. However, these actions are necessary to reduce the spread of COVID-19. So what is anxiety? According to the American Psychological Association, anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. But as we can see, even from this image, anxiety can present itself with many other symptoms such as sweating, headaches, trembling, restlessness, and avoidance. The next thing I'm going to say is very important, so we'll probably say it multiple times throughout this presentation. Anxiety can present differently in everyone. It is also important to consult a mental health professional if you have concerns about anxiety symptoms. Because anxiety can present in many different ways, let's talk quickly about some of the myths and facts surrounding anxiety. Maybe you've heard that if you have an anxiety disorder, it's important to avoid stress and stressful situations, when in reality, avoiding anxiety tends to reinforce it. You can be anxious and still do whatever you have to do. Another myth commonly heard is that you should snap a rubber band on your wrist every time you have a bad thought. Studies actually show that suppressing your thoughts makes them stronger and more frequent. So think about it like this: the thoughts you resist persist. And lastly, the biggest myth is talking to someone about anxiety will make them even more anxious, when actually providing accurate information about anxiety can reduce confusion and shame. Explaining that anxiety is a common and normal experience can allow it to be managed successfully. Sometimes it's hard for us to label or identify emotions that we're having, especially if it's a new emotion that we've never experienced before, or if that emotion is thought of as weak or negative. Other words you might use at home that could be considered a synonym for anxiety may be worried, concerned, fear or scared, or nervous. So as Lucy and I continue through this presentation, just know we mean the same thing as you when you might say worried or nervous or some other word. So the first thing I like to tell people when talking about anxiety is that anxiety is a totally normal feeling. This is the feeling that helps get our bodies ready to respond to situations that might be dangerous or threatening. Basically, it's the feeling that helped our ancestors run away when they were being chased by lions and tigers and bears. It is also the feeling that helps keep us from, say, walking into traffic. It keeps us safe. Anxiety can even also be used as a positive motivator in our lives. It can be used to push us forward to, let's say, get a degree, ask for a promotion, study for a test, or learn how to homeschool our kids. Anxiety can serve a purpose. Anxiety is not dangerous. Though anxiety may feel uncomfortable, it doesn't last long, it is temporary, and it will eventually decrease. Also, sometimes thinking people know you're anxious can increase your anxiety, but most people can't tell when you're anxious except maybe those close to you, such as a parent, friend, or spouse. Anxiety is adaptive or helpful. As I mentioned before, anxiety helps us prepare for real danger, such as if we're confronted by a bear in the woods, or we want to perform at our best, like when we're getting ready for a big game or doing an online presentation. When we experience anxiety, the amygdala in our brain sends a distress signal. The hypothalamus activates the sympathetic nervous system by sending signals to the adrenal glands. These glands respond by pumping the hormone epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, into the bloodstream. This response is called fight, flight, freeze. Some of the symptoms we can experience when this response is activated may be increased heart rate and blood pressure. Some may get very pale or red in the face. Pupils can often dilate. We can feel more on edge, become more observant, and our senses may heighten. Our hearts beat faster to pump blood to our muscles, so we have the energy to run away or fight off danger. When we freeze, we may not notice, allowing danger to pass. This response is also called anxious arousal. Anxious arousal can happen when there is a real danger, but also when something simply feels dangerous, but really isn't, such as giving an oral presentation in class or before a big test or starting a new job. Anxious arousal can often make you feel jittery, on edge, and uncomfortable. It may also be hard to think clearly, and this feeling can become so overwhelming that anxious people stop doing things or going places that make them feel anxious. So when we stop doing things or going places because of the anxiety symptoms, and when our body reacts as if it's in danger in the absence of danger, this is when we know our anxiety has become a problem. A great way to explain this is by using the smoke alarm analogy. An alarm can help protect us when there's an actual fire, but sometimes a smoke alarm is too sensitive and goes off when there really isn't a fire, like when toast is burning in a toaster. Like a smoke alarm, anxiety is helpful when it works, but when it goes off when there's no real danger, then we might want to fix it. So now that we've discussed what anxiety is, a little bit about how it can present and how the brain works, let's get into how anxiety works. The example here is a child has a negative anxious thought. What if mom doesn't come home? This thought activates the fight, flight, freeze response and all the symptoms it comes with it. So tummy ache, headache, and racing heart. This thought and feeling then creates the behavior of find mom and stay home from school because of all the tummy and headaches. The image you see shows 3 parts of anxiety: thoughts, what we say to ourselves; physical feelings, how our bodies respond; and behaviors, what we do or our actions. So thoughts create feelings, feelings create behaviors, and behaviors reinforce thoughts. This is the premise of cognitive behavioral therapy, which my partner Lucy will touch on more later on in this presentation. But understanding the idea of how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all related to each other in a cycle can really go a long way in understanding how anxiety works. So I'll give you one last example. Let's say you're going to an amusement park and you think, I love roller coasters. You're probably going to feel excited and happy, right? And you might even go on all of the roller coasters, sit in the front car, and ride as many as you can. All of this would feed back to the next time you hear you're going to an amusement park. You'll think that was so much fun and I can't wait to do it again. But if you hear you're going to an amusement park and you think, what if I die on a roller coaster? You might start feeling really scared and nervous and anxious. And when people start to feel really scared and nervous and anxious, a lot of the time they start to avoid the things that make them feel that way. So they avoid going on a roller coaster. They might even avoid going to the amusement park altogether. And all of that would feed back to the next time they hear they're going to an amusement park and they think, I can't do it. I can't do roller coasters. I can't cope with the anxiety of roller coasters. I can't stay safe. Do you see the cycle? We'll touch on the cycle a bit more in a few slides. Right now, I want to go over how to recognize anxiety and specifically identifying anxious thoughts. So the first thing we want to do is to learn how to investigate. This is in order for us to find out more about our own anxiety. This is because anxiety can present differently in everyone. For physical symptoms, sometimes it's easy to talk about how anxiety can present for you in your body, but sometimes it's hard to put words to those sensations. So for younger kids, drawing a sketch of the body and then prompting them to identify where they may feel anxiety in their body can help get the conversation started. For older kids and adults, identifying their own symptoms from a list of typical physical symptoms can be helpful. Some physical symptoms may include muscle tension or pain, trembling or shaking, sweating, heart racing, rapid breathing or shortness of breath, crying, weakness or fatigue, trouble sleeping, headaches, stomach pain or nausea, butterflies, or feeling hot or cold, among many others. Sometimes for younger kids, coming up with a name for their anxiety, like worry monster or Mr. Worry, can be a strategy to help the child adopt an observer role when dealing with anxiety and give them a greater sense of control. For older kids, using a music analogy like turning up or down the volume of their anxiety can have the same effect. So the way you think influences how you feel and then what you do. This means identifying what you're thinking in situations when you feel anxious becomes pretty important. This can be hard though, because we don't often have a lot of experience stopping to think about what we're thinking. So let's use a hypothetical situation. Your parent, guardian, or spouse is late getting home. Thought 1 may be, yes, I can do whatever I want. Thought 2, maybe they got stuck in traffic. Thought 3, what if they were in an accident? Thought 4, they work too much. There are a lot of possible thoughts that people could have in any given situation. The point is to start to become aware of what you're thinking in those situations and how that impacts how you feel. Sometimes experiencing anxious thoughts can happen by ruminating, which is continuously thinking about the same thoughts. Overthinking, which is thinking about something too much for too long. Brain fog, feeling like it's hard to focus or put thoughts into words. Sometimes we say, I can't think straight. Racing thoughts are thoughts that are difficult to shut down, and they're often intrusive, consistent, and persistent, and they come quickly one right after the other. Feeling stuck in your head basically means that you aren't participating in the present moment because you're thinking all of your thoughts. And obsessive thoughts are thoughts that preoccupy or fill the mind intrusively and to a troubling extent. Agonizing thoughts often cause great mental pain, and overanalyzing is thinking about something in too much detail. These are pretty common sayings to explain if we're in distress about our anxious thoughts. As you become more aware of what you're thinking, you may start to notice some different themes in those thoughts. In mental health, we're aware of those themes as well, and they are sometimes called cognitive distortions or thinking traps. It's important to remember that all of us think in patterns, but sometimes these patterns become so common or ingrained that they start to contribute to anxiety in a way that's unhelpful. They start to make things more difficult for us, so identifying these thinking traps is kind of like a coping shortcut. So one of the most common thinking traps is fortune telling. Fortune telling is predicting that something will turn out badly, knowing that in reality, none of us can know with 100% certainty that something will happen. Another common thinking trap is all or nothing thinking. So this is tending to look at things as all good or all bad. I'm either going to get 100% or totally fail this assignment. The next is mind reading, so predicting what other people are going to think about us or something related to us, and usually predicting that they're going to think something negative. Overgeneralizing is using words like always or never, like I always drop things or they never want to do anything with me. Labeling is using a single negative word to describe ourselves or a situation, like I'm dumb or this is the worst. Overestimating danger is thinking the negative outcome is more likely than what we know is true from the evidence or real life. Filtering is paying attention only to negative events or information. Catastrophizing is predicting that the worst possible outcome will happen and that we won't be able to cope with it. Lastly, should statements. These are telling yourself how you should or must think, feel, or behave, especially when that's not how you're actually thinking, feeling, or behaving. This could be like, I shouldn't feel sad, or I must not be mad. Becoming aware of your thoughts allows you to start to notice if you're falling into a thinking trap. Different behaviors can present as a result of anxiety as well. It's important to remember that behavior changes are a significant part of anxiety, and again, are different for everyone. The first physical behavior is moping. This is a desire to be alone. You may feel fatigued from your anxiety and just want to recuperate. We also call this isolation, and too much time alone can often increase anxiety. The next is compulsions. Sometimes these behaviors are directly related to fear and obsession, such as if someone has a fear of germs and they need to compulsively wash their hands. Compulsions are typically created to provide some type of relief for the person with the negative anxiety-provoking thought. This behavior can also be associated with obsessive compulsive disorder, which was mentioned in the Angst movie. This is a marked increase in anxiety and distress that leads to an urge to complete compulsions. Lastly, there is unhealthy coping tools. These could be substance use and abuse, as well as overeating. These are used to help cope with anxiety symptoms by dulling it. Ultimately, using unhealthy coping tools may intensify the problem. With drugs, alcohol, and food, the more you use them to cope with anxiety, the more they become your only coping strategy and the one your body feels it needs when it feels anxious. The behavior seen the most in people struggling with anxiety is avoidance. Avoidance involves trying to avoid stressors or triggers rather than dealing with them. There are 5 different types of avoidance: situational, cognitive, protective, somatic, and substitution. Situational avoidance is the most common type, and it's used due to fear of certain individuals or kinds of people, locations, animals, foods, activities, or social situations. So this could be avoiding work or school if there's someone there that you don't like, skipping class due to a test, or not wanting to eat in the cafeteria. The next is cognitive avoidance, which is attempting to avoid unpleasant or distressing thoughts or memories by telling yourself not to think about something or taking some sort of action to numb out or distract yourself. Protective avoidance is the use of excessive safety behaviors that might include checking, cleaning, over-preparing, perfectionism, or procrastination. Next is somatic avoidance. People try not to experience physical feelings that remind them of a negative emotion or experience, such as feeling hot, being out of breath, or getting fatigued or exhausted. Lastly, substitution avoidance is essentially trying to replace one feeling with another. A person might replace grief with anger or another emotion that feels better for them at the time. It's important to know that avoidance isn't always maladaptive or unhelpful, but in many cases, it's not sustainable in the long run, and it can actually make things worse. So we have learned that the way you think influences how you feel. Feelings create behaviors, and behaviors reinforce thoughts. If you haven't picked up already, although feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are all interconnected, typically negative or unhelpful thoughts gets the ball rolling when it comes to anxiety. So I'm going to briefly touch on the 3 steps to identify anxious thoughts and the cycle of anxiety, and then hand the rest of the presentation off to Lucy. So the 3 steps to identify anxiety or anxious thoughts are: number 1, identify the event, what was happening. Number 2, identify your thoughts, what did you think? And number 3, identify your emotions, how did you feel physically and emotionally? Understanding the ways you may think, feel, and behave due to any given event is a great place to start in helping yourself manage anxiety. So this is the cycle of anxiety. We see here it starts with anxiety at the top, then moves over to avoidance, short-term relief from anxiety, and then to long-term anxiety growth. An example of this cycle could be someone sees a dog and they feel scared, so they cross the street. The anxiety that they initially felt immediately comes down, but over time, their anxiety about dogs goes up because that behavior of avoiding the dog reinforces the thought of fearing the dog. Cognitive behavioral therapy is used to help people change the way that they think about situations when they feel anxious, and change what they do in situations when they feel anxious in order to change how they feel over time. How this is done is by changing the cycle of avoidance to approach. Lucy?
Thank you, Rachel, for that really in-depth overview of anxiety. So at this point in the presentation, I'd like to switch our focus from the avoiding the anxiety to actually approaching the anxiety. So I'll discuss ways in which we can help individuals cope with the anxiety. And we recognize that there's a lot of information in this presentation. So I'd like to invite you all to take a deep breath, breathing in, feeling the lungs expanding, and breathing out, feeling a sense of letting go, all of the tension. So just take what resonates with you from this presentation. And as Rachel said at the end, we'll have time for some questions. So we see here that we begin with a physical feeling of anxiety, which, as Rachel mentioned, may present in many different forms. And if we are able to accept the sensation of the symptoms without assigning meaning, we can use the opposite action to approach that situation. So instead of trying to avoid it, we can actually meet it head on. We can utilize our coping skills to reduce the physical discomfort, which will help in the end to reduce the anxiety and also boost our confidence. So when we experience the anxiety symptoms, our attention is really quite self-focused on those sensations. And while our immediate reaction is to escape or avoid, which does offer that short-term relief, we really want our goal to be long-term reduced anxiety, meaning we need to find a way to break that cycle. And one way to do this is by approaching the anxiety and the symptoms head on. So the basic point here is that you don't get rid of anxiety by trying to avoid situations which cause anxiety. Anxiety is that feeling we get when there's something that's in need of our attention. It's the voice of concern. And when you ignore those symptoms of anxiety by pushing it away, stuffing, or avoiding the triggers, those signals may just get louder and louder in order to be heard. So by listening to and accepting our symptoms, we get to take the control. So accept the anxiety, treat it as a friend and not an enemy. When you avoid situations in hopes of decreasing anxiety, your brain actually misses out on the opportunity to distinguish between a true threat and what is otherwise safe. And an example would be a teen sitting in a class trying to pay attention to what is going on. And seemingly out of nowhere, they begin to feel anxious. So their heart may begin to pound, their hands may begin to sweat. And what's happening is that emotion part of the brain called the amygdala has been alerted that there's danger nearby. And this could be triggered by something as simple as a smell, a sight, a sound, or something else altogether, and something that you may not even be able to identify. So in this situation, the teen may just absolutely bolt out of class for fear of the worst possible outcome. And this not only interferes with the learning, but it also makes that anxiety grow even stronger for the next time that the teen encounters a similar situation. So as we take small steps of facing our fears, we really strengthen the brain's capability to be less anxious. Thinking positively does not occur automatically, but thinking negatively sure does. A good practice is to ask our children to think of 2 positive thoughts for every negative thought about themselves that they have. We all have an inner critic, and we can all benefit from reminders of our positives. A simple way to help children with this is to suggest that they write their positives on sticky notes, put them on their computer, on their desk, somewhere around their room, and it just acts as a visual reminder. So when that self-critic rears its ugly head, we're ready for it. Here's an example of a perceived flaw that one might have. School is hard for me. So the positives that one could glean from this perceived flaw could be something like, 1, I work hard to overcome this, so I have a strong work ethic. And 2 could be, I have empathy for others who may also struggle. And this simple task can help us to increase self-esteem, improve our motivation, and develop resilience. So anxiety is a normal emotion. We all experience it. When we're in stressful situations, and sometimes, as Rachel mentioned, anxiety can help save our lives when we are faced with true danger or there's a need to take action. Anxiety helps us meet deadlines, study for exams, deal with emergencies. But it is true that sometimes anxiety can be taken to the extreme when there is no real threat. And in this case, an individual may be diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. Shortened, we're going to call it GAD. So according to the DSM-5, some of the symptoms related to GAD include restlessness, fear, inability to fall asleep or stay asleep, difficulty concentrating, difficulty starting or completing a task. And due to these symptoms, it might be difficult for an individual to complete an everyday task, such as getting up, going to school, going to work, and a whole host of other tasks. In this case, it might be helpful to reach out for some professional help. It's basically if you're unable to function because of the anxious symptoms. And I think back into the Angst movie that we watched, and how they were talking about some of the kids who, they were late to class and they didn't want to go in, but they were able to get over that fear and go into the class, even though they thought everyone would be looking at them. The kind of anxiety that I'm talking about that might need professional help would be a child that just could not push through that fear of getting in themselves into the class. So in the meantime, here I'm going to talk about a few strategies that people living with anxiety can use to cope. So taking time to talk to your teens and letting them know that you are there for them and want to help them work through whatever it is they are going through. Connection is extremely valuable, especially when an individual is feeling so vulnerable. By simply having a conversation with your child and asking them what they are thinking or feeling opens that door to connection and conversation. Even when a teen may resist help, it is important to present and be available and ask your child, how can I help? In the movie, they mentioned, don't ignore the symptoms, be there, listen, ask questions. So second on my list is find ways to manage your own feelings by talking with friends, family, or colleagues. Help your child function by having them go to school, whether in person or online. Continue with daily chores, even when your child is feeling anxious. It helps to teach your children that they are capable of learning and completing tasks, even when they are dealing with anxious feelings. This increases confidence while also reducing anxiety. Name it. I think you'll remember back to the Angst movie, name it to tame it. It's be genuine. Like if you are feeling anxious, name it and show that you yourself are still capable of following through with completing tasks. Next is show confidence in your child's ability to face their anxiety and recognize their bravery in facing this anxiety. Remind them that their thoughts and feelings are common, especially during the time of COVID-19. You can ask them what they think might help work them through their struggles. And then also suggest some self-care strategies that might be useful during this time. And here's a list that I found that's put out by the National Council of Behavioral Health. So as I mentioned, sticking to a routine, stay connected, comfortable, that means like talk about your feelings and worries with people that you feel comfortable with. And then give yourself permission to stop worrying. Limit. This is a really big one. So limiting the number of news outlets that you're paying attention to or the social media outlets. We're all bombarded with that. And kind. Be kind to others, but also to yourself. Gratitude helps in so many ways. Anxiety is one of the most treatable mental health conditions. And I want to mention a few of the treatment modalities that are often used in treatment. The first is cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT. I'll refer to it at that from here on out. And the second is mindfulness. So the basic goal of CBT is to help rewire the brain to decrease that judgmental critic that I was talking about. And according to the American Psychological Association, CBT is a short-term treatment modality that has been proven to be effective for a range of problems, including anxiety. A number of research studies suggest that CBT leads to significant improvements in functioning and in quality of life. CBT is based on several core principles that include the philosophy that problems are based on learned patterns of unhelpful behavior and unhelpful ways of thinking. CBT helps people learn different ways of thinking to promote healthy living. The first step is to recognize the distorted thinking pattern, which are creating issues in your life, and then try to reevaluate those thoughts in light of reality. In addition, problem-solving skills are utilized to cope with difficult situations. This strategy gives people a sense of confidence. Makes sense? CBT treatment works at changing automatic thoughts, which come before feelings, which lead to action. So by simply changing your thoughts, you can reduce negative emotions and unhealthy behaviors. Let's look at an example of this process with someone who has social anxiety. So their thought could be, I feel awkward in groups. I don't want to go to the party. I think people will think I'm a loser. The feeling that comes from that is sadness, could be shame, fear. And then the behavior is they end up not attending, they isolate, and they avoid. So this pattern leaves an individual feeling, as you can imagine, lonely, isolated, which is a recipe for unhappiness. And this pattern of thought is called emotional reasoning. So I feel it, so it must be true, which is a cognitive distortion or an irrational thought, which leads to a reality that is inaccurate. CBT works to challenge these thoughts or cognitive distortions by first identifying the negative thought. So in this example, you may discuss why you feel uncomfortable in groups of people at parties. A trained professional can help you unpack the thought and identify the root thoughts driving at that anxious feeling. Remember in the movie, they talked about finding your core anxious feeling, and this is really what that is getting at. So the second step in CBT is to challenge negative thoughts. And in the example, you may discover that your discomfort being in groups of people at a party stems from an experience you had at an earlier time in your life. And in this step, a therapist will help you question the evidence of your thought, analyze your belief behind it, and then reality test. The final step is to replace that negative thought with a realistic one. So in the example, you could replace everyone thinks I am a loser because I am awkward with just because I feel awkward doesn't mean everyone sees me that way or that I am a loser. So as you practice this over time, this exercise, it becomes easier and easier. So next is mindfulness. And mindfulness really works by being engaged in the present moment and without judgment. Oftentimes, people hold themselves to an unrealistic ideal perfectionism. But as humans, we are not meant to be perfect. Perfection is not possible, but transforming oneself is. Another point from the movie Angst is that they made a strong point of saying that people can change. So we all have that ability, right? We have the ability to change, learn, grow, regardless of our circumstances. Mindfulness can be as simple as paying attention to your breath. Research from Harvard shows that the mind wanders 47% of the time. So mindfulness is really training that mind to be present. It can be as simple as standing up, planting your both feet on the ground and breathing. So there's this square breathing exercise that we often do. It's breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. So in addition to that, you can also use your 5 senses to help further ground you. You can name one thing that you see, hear, smell, touch, and taste. So what you practice grows stronger, and brain scans have shown that the areas related to learning, compassion, and attention are stronger and more prevalent in people who practice meditation and mindfulness. Research has proven that mindfulness is effective when treating anxiety with veterans, people suffering from PTSD, stressed out college students, people suffering from medical issues, and a whole host of other issues. So really the data has shown that mindfulness works. Dr. Richard Davidson, he identifies the 4 pillars of a healthy mind. So we have awareness, connection, purpose, and insight. Awareness really is that ability to keep focused and resist the distractions. Connection, like I said, strong interpersonal relationships with kindness and compassion, important parts. Purpose is that our life has a purpose, even those mundane tasks that we have to do, everyday silly tasks. And insight really is that we have insight into the narrative we have about ourselves, and we simply see it for what it is. So both of these modalities, CBT and mindfulness, help people manage intense emotions and feelings more efficiently. This doesn't happen overnight, but just as athletes need to practice in order to be the best that they can be, so do we need to practice and exercise our brains to be what we want to be. If it is a calm state of mind that you desire, then you must practice. Neuroplasticity is that fancy word that means our brains are adaptable. This is really achieved by repeatedly practicing thinking and behaving differently. Sure, it's more comfortable to stick with old habits, but through practice and over time, those new habits become ingrained and ultimately are really beneficial for us. So as noted previously, not everyone will react to stress in the same way, but here is a list of typical reactions that one may experience: feeling stressed or overwhelmed, frustrated or angry, worried or anxious, feelings of restlessness, agitation or being on high alert, or the opposite could also be seen. So individuals could present as sad, fatigued, tired, sluggish. There are tools to measure one's anxiety to help track and understand progress. The subjective units of distress, or SUDS tool, can help you rate your anxiety. The higher anxiety corresponds to higher temperature. This helps identify and become more aware of your triggers and helps us be a part of figuring out how to best implement and manage steps at facing our fears. This helps us to see that we can experience different levels of anxiety and that our levels of anxiety can be different across different situations. Anxiety levels can change even with the same situation. And lastly, even with high levels of anxiety, we can be successful. COVID introduces its own set of complications. Children have experienced school closures and remote and hybrid learning environments. They've had to miss important events such as graduations, proms, sporting events. Kids are really left feeling fragile about the status of friends because social cues are difficult to read behind a mask or through a computer screen. If they are lucky enough to attend school in person, then they have to socially distance and isolate from their peers at a time in their life when it's very natural and normal to seek connection with peers. This change and disruption has led to feelings of isolation, uncertainty, and confusion. We've all heard that we need to step away and not be helicopter parents. But when children are really struggling, parents need to meet them where their struggle begins. It is our job to help our children through the difficult times. We know our children best, and we need to parent with empathy and compassion. It is important to really lean in and listen and ask questions. One of the most important questions we can ask our kids is simply, how can I help? If they push us away, keep going back to check in. Teen brains are rapidly developing and can seem very confusing. The amygdala is in overdrive. And that, like I said, that's the emotion part of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex, which is that rational part of the brain, which helps to manage the emotions and make logical decisions, that's not fully developed until our mid-20s. So in the meantime, the adults in our teens' lives, whether it be teachers, counselors, parents, coaches, we can lend them our prefrontal cortex in tough moments, which can offer a mind shift. Building strong bridges between schools, families, and communities can help our teens move through these difficult times. Thank you all for taking this time to listen to this presentation on anxiety. We hope that you will have heard a few nuggets of information to take away that will help you navigate these challenging times. And at this time, we're just going to open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Lucy and Rachel, for that presentation. That was very helpful and made some nice connections, I believe, to the movie Angst that the viewers were able to watch over the past couple of days. Unfortunately, I don't think email is working either at the moment. We've had some technical difficulties today in the Salem School District, so I apologize for that. So I'm going to ask some questions based on feedback I've received, and I'm going to invite others on the team. Before I do that, Ashley or Sandy, is there anything you wanted to add before we go into any questions?
I'd like to just quickly give a little bit of overview of some services that we do provide at the Center for Life Management. We work with kids actually as young as 2. We have a young adult program, so we will work with the young adults in around 24. Many of our clinicians are trained in the interventions that Lucy had spoke of, CBT. We also have many of our clinicians trained in MATCH, which stands for Modular Approach to Treatment for Anxiety, Depression, Conduct Disorders, and Trauma. Because one thing that we do see in many kids is they're often struggling with more than one, mental health issue. Somebody may be very anxious, but also be experiencing some symptoms of depression and vice versa. And so this intervention allows for the therapist to kind of go in and out of what they need to work on with a child at any given time. So just wanted to make the parents aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
And also to go off of that, we have access to a tracking system, which a lot of parents really enjoy because they're able to take a weekly survey, the child and the parent, so you can really see on a graph how one of the clients is doing and
that's
see
great.
the progress.
Thank you. Nicole, is there anything from the school end you would like to add at this point, or do you want to just go into the questions?
Sure. I think that I would just encourage, whether it be students, staff, family members who are joining us on the webinar tonight, or have watched the film earlier this week, and are wondering what they can do to get some support, to just allow yourself to have that conversation that you need to have, either with your family member, with your parent, or with someone from school that you trust. Just give yourself the permission to kind of have the conversation, to explore what it is that you might need and explore what it is that you're going through, so that someone can give you a hand and help you out and point you in the right direction of getting some support that can help get you through.
Thank you. Okay, this question is for the team, so if anyone would like to answer it. This is for the parents that are on the call. What do you do if you know your child is struggling, but they won't talk to you?
I can take that one. So, and I'm sure that's more common, right? Kids don't always open up to parents. I think one thing that we, when we're working with parents, is really to talk about how they can be present for their child. Sometimes kids close up when you're asking them a lot of questions. And I don't know, maybe some parents have experienced this where, they're just a simple thing like, how was your day? And, you might get sort of a gruff response, or the child, seems irritable. that can even be related to stress, right? Like, oh, I'm not, they're not telling you they're feeling upset or in a bad mood, but they are, and they don't want to talk about it. And so, maybe even just talking about things that the child enjoys, or just trying to get the child to engage in any kind of conversation and validating the child. So, if you even recognize, like, geez, it seems like you're a little sad today. So you're just naming the feeling, validating that, if they have a particular struggle. And sometimes that can help kids open up, because it kind of takes that feeling of like, oh, what is my parent looking for? Are they looking for a particular answer from me? Or are they going to think that it's silly that I'm, struggling with any particular thing? So validation and just kind of being where your child's at.
I'll add a little bit to that, Sandy. Like I said in my presentation, just like for you to take ownership of your own feelings too, it really helps our children see that we can deal with it and we can move on with our daily task. And also from the Angst movie, there was a part that said, like, if the emotions go unspoken, we really give them power. So really just being there, being available for your kid, leaning into them, asking, just like I said, how can I help? Or, and I know teenagers can be prickly, so they sometimes want to just push us away, but they will take that little nugget of your empathy and compassion that you can show them, and really accept them for who they are. And don't, like, we want to just fix, like, we don't want to recognize that, yes, you might have anxiety. Don't say, oh, you're just really, nervous or anxious. Really accept that what they're telling you is real for them.
That's great. Thank you very much. Nicole, what advice would you give to students who either are experiencing some anxiety themselves, or they have a friend who they are concerned about? What would you recommend they do? What steps should they take?
Sure. I would recommend, certainly, first and foremost, try and get connected with an adult at your school or home or coach or whomever it might be that you trust, who can just kind of sit with you and talk through what are the thoughts you're having, what are the feelings that are connected to those thoughts. If you're seeing a recurring pattern for yourself or for your friend in certain situations that are becoming more anxiety provoking, or certain things that you are avoiding altogether, so that you can talk through what those situations are. And then don't feel like you have to fix it or make it go away or hide from it forever. But let yourself have those conversations so that you can talk with someone about what are going to be some of the skills you can get through, so that you don't get stuck in a pattern of isolation, or constantly avoiding your math class, or constantly avoiding a social group you used to be a part of, or constantly avoiding something that you used to find passion about, that you haven't been taking part in because it's bringing you anxiety and you just haven't figured out how to quite work through that. Sometimes it can be difficult to put into place some of those techniques, like we saw in the film, of like the young man who was going through the clothing store. That can be very uncomfortable at first, and it can be very scary, but it can certainly go miles to help you in the long run. So if you just kind of partner up with someone, with a friend, with an adult who can help you out to get you through some of those tough situations, that exposure in the short term can definitely help you out in the long run of getting through your anxiety and bringing some skills to play.
Sandy, did you want to add to that at all? Because I know you had mentioned the part about the exposure struck you from the movie.
Yeah, well, one of the, that is a part of the intervention when we're working with kids on anxiety. And as mentioned in the film, avoidance is actually only going to increase your anxiety. So, when Rachel talked about the roller coaster as an example, right? You are afraid of roller coasters. Now, in terms of exposure, you wouldn't take your child and just say, oh, you're going to go on the the roller coaster, we would work in more like the exposure is slow. So that, for example, it might be, we're just going to go look at it. And if you noticed in the film, the woman working with the teenage boy was asking him to rate his anxiety. This is so important. So it's important that the child gets the feeling like, oh, okay, whatever's going on in my body and my mind right now, this is anxiety, and be able to rate it. She talked about like a scale of maybe 0 to 10. 10 is like, I'm in a real panic. And, 0 is I'm not feeling any anxiety. And this is very key, because what you want the child to understand is that the more I look at this, I'm looking at the roller coaster right now, I'm an 8. It's making me extremely nervous, so then they take a break, right? You take a break, you might do some breathing, mindfulness or something, then go back and look at it again. And then they're going to rate it. And over time, you would see that anxiety level decreasing. And for the child, they've learned, oh, okay, I've mastered this. This isn't so bad after all. I was able to manage it. And whatever that 8 fear is of like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I, look at this roller coaster, they realize that, no, I'm okay. And I was able to master this. And so that's where exposure can be really helpful. And again, the understanding of what the feeling is, this is how I feel, and this is anxiety, and the rate of it, the level of it. So
and this, you just spoke to this, and also I know it was in the presentation referenced, but when we speak to children about anxiety, should we use the word anxiety with them?
I think it's important to use the word anxiety, and the other words that kids talk about, worry, scared, those are all related to anxiety. But it's as was discussed in the presentation, we all experience anxiety. It's part of it's, and there's good reason for it. If, you have a test tomorrow and you're anxious about it or worried about it, it makes you say, oh, I better study, right? If you didn't have that anxiety and you were like, oh, no concern, you might not study for it. And so I think it's important for kids to understand, to be able to name the feelings. And as I said, it could be scared, worried, anxious. They all sort of connect with the same feeling.
Okay, thank you. So if there's anything else anyone would like to add in, I'm going to invite you to do that in a moment. I just would like to reiterate to everyone who's watching, first of all, thank you for joining us. Hopefully, through both the viewing of the film and participating in this webinar, you've been given some more information, some tools to help either you or someone you love that might be coping with anxiety. But please don't let it end here. As was pointed out by everyone on this panel, reach out for help. There's plenty of support. That's why we're doing this, because we're here to support you. So before we close, I would like, if anyone else has any final words they'd like to hammer home, or I'm just opening it back up to the team for one last word.
Sure. I think I would just like to say thank you to our friends at CLM, and thank you to everyone who's been able to watch the film Angst. I think we all could take a little bit of tips and tricks away from it. So even dealing with those of us who don't have a generalized anxiety disorder, I know I came away with some breathing techniques that I'm going to put into play in some of the situations that might get me a little worked up. So hopefully folks took some things away. Thank you to you folks who came to join us, and to those who are watching, I encourage you to reach out and partner with your school counselor, school psychologist, administrator, teacher, whoever it is, to help find you the right fit and the right person who can help you out with whatever it is that you're going through.
Okay, so thank you all. And again, please be in touch with us, anyone on the screen or anyone within the school district, to answer some questions or point you in the right direction. So have a good evening, everybody. And thank you again to the CLM team for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.